Hello, everyone. Welcome to Saturday's edition of Weekend Waypoints, a production of SEC Extra and D1Baseball.com, presented by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Have a jam-packed show, given that yesterday, Friday, was the craziest day in the SEC so far this season. Kind of knew it would be going into the day with how much interesting stuff we had, and it lived up to every bit of the hype, for good and for bad. There was, some SEC teams went down, or struggled or had to have wild comebacks. We will talk about all of that here in a second. But first, a word from Academy Sports and Outdoors. Get ready for a new season of fishing with Academy Sports and Outdoors and reel in the best gear at low prices every day. Plus, Academy offers easy ways to shop and save time, like free 1 hour in-store or curbside pickup on academy.com. Okay, sorry about that. I had the YouTube video on in the background there. But yes, thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors for being with us here for Weekend Waypoints, for Highway to Hoover, for the D1 Baseball podcast, and a whole bunch more stuff throughout the season. Okay, let's get into it. First, we got some comments. I guess we'll clean some of those up first because some of them are kind of related. Caleb Falk says LSU got another tough quality win. Good to see Dickinson do damage after Jared Jones. Agreed. We'll talk about that here in a minute. LSU, a close win over Kansas State in 10 innings, a good test for the Tigers. I think that's probably healthy, to get tested like that before SEC play starts. What's up with Kendall Rogers' favorite team, the Texas A&M Aggies, asking for a friend? We will also talk about that. Texas A&M losing a late lead, 9th inning lead against Arizona yesterday. Not great. It hasn't been the start to the season that A&M was looking for, and it's not just injuries. I mean, that's part of it, but there are other things into it. Chad Erickson, as an Arizona fan, coming in saying, "Let's go Cats!" Congratulations, Chad, on a big win yesterday for those Cats. Joshua Catlett says, "Massive win for Auburn yesterday. That's an impressive offense to shut out." I totally agree. A shutout win over Ohio State, a team that we saw put runs on, pretty much everybody last weekend in that tournament in Jacksonville. So yeah, impressive stuff there for sure. Visa V16 says, "Good morning, Joe." Good morning there. Tommy Harvey with the Go Vols. Good morning, Tommy. Thank you for joining us. Miami's bats. This is on X. Miami's bats showed no fight once we lost the lead. Need a bounce back today. Yeah, that kind of, is the way that rivalry series has gone. Miami typically is game and gives Florida a test, but Florida always seems to have just a little bit more in those games, and that's why the rivalry has largely been as one-sided as it's been of late. Mississippi Vol on YouTube, go Big Orange. A big win for Tennessee yesterday over another Orange team in Oklahoma State. So, Tennyson Tipton on X, long season and all, but A&M is reeling right now. What do we need to start heading back in a positive direction? Hold that thought. We will certainly talk about A&M a little bit more here shortly and get into it. But let's talk about the 3 games. I have 3 games of the day because I think they're kind of all related in various ways. That's Arkansas 11, Charlotte 10, UGA 10, Florida Gulf Coast 9, and then LSU 8, K-State 5 in 10 innings. That one's a little bit different in some ways. That was more of a back and forth affair, whereas the first 2 were just comebacks, SEC teams on the ropes, and then they got comebacks. So let's pull up some box scores here because they're kind of wild. Pulling it up. Make sure I choose the right one. Bingo. Okay, so here, again, this is wild. There are a number of numbers here that stand out to me. The biggest one, at least initially, is this 5 spot for Charlotte in the first, and then a 4 spot in the fourth. And if we scroll down here, you could see that that's all against Gabe Gackle. And I did not see the start. Perhaps I'll go back and try to watch the kind of raw video of it just to get a better feel for it. But that's not what Arkansas is looking for with Gackle. And, last weekend he was just kind of okay. And so I don't know if the 2 things are related or if it's just isolated incidents. I guess we'll see as the season goes on. And Charlotte's not a bad team. So, but still 10 hits, 9 earned runs, a couple of wild pitches, it took 66 pitches to get through 3 innings. Nothing, just not a lot. Excuse me, not a lot of positive to take out of that. Now, the positive is, though, as we scroll back up, this number, a 10-run fourth. As you can see here on the scoring plays, it's, it was a long inning. You get a home run, double, RBI single, RBI ground out, RBI single, RBI double, RBI single. And that stands out, obviously, because that's what Arkansas has been waiting for. That's what Arkansas fans have been waiting for, is that type of inning. Now, was this Charlotte pitching? Maybe. But even against whatever, if you're capable of scoring putting together a 10-run inning, that's pretty impressive. Now, would you like to have spread the scoring out maybe a little bit more and had multiple rallies like that? Sure. But this is the type of win that Arkansas fans have kind of been worried that their team can't win. You'd prefer it be an SEC team and not Charlotte. I get it. But the idea that Gabe Gackle could give up 9 runs in 3 innings and you win that game, I don't think I would have at any point if you told me Gabe Gackle gives up 9 runs in 3 innings. I almost don't care who the opponent is. I'm like, well, yeah, they're probably not winning that game. So kudos to the bullpen for holding Charlotte at bay after a certain point, for the most part. And then kudos to the offense for putting together the comeback that it did. Okay. Let's pull up the other one here. Georgia 10, Florida Gulf Coast 9. And there are other other storylines with this one. Okay. So this one a little bit different, although same 5-run first inning for Florida Gulf Coast. Georgia, got back in this one a little, by chipping away a little more so than Arkansas did, where Arkansas had one big inning here. But Leighton Finley took a tough outing. 2 innings pitched, 5 earned runs. The 4 walks are the troubling number there. But then Florida Gulf Coast did a pretty good job against the bullpen too. Eric Hammond was great, but they scored off Hoskins and Colton Smith. They competitive in that regard. They just couldn't keep the Georgia offense totally at bay. A good number of big days for Georgia offensive players here. And in the back and forth late, obviously the scoring the walk-off run on an error, kind of fitting for like a 9-9 game where we had just a little bit of everything. But the funny thing here, and the tweet has since been deleted, but there was a tweet the Florida Gulf Coast baseball account sent out that was, using like a meme that you see around where it says they supposed to be SEC with at the time Florida Gulf Coast was up on Georgia. And then of course, Georgia comes back to win. And now they have a tweet atop of their Twitter feed that says, the admin has been relieved of their duties. 2 more chances this weekend or whatever, with the losing score graphic. That's funny, objectively funny that it ended up that way after they posted that. The post itself is whatever. Like, I don't get bent out of shape by that stuff. I mean, that's what we know this, social media, the team social medias get snarky sometimes because you're just trying to be funny or trying to be unique or trying to get attention. And that's just the way, that's the way a lot of them operate. So just because that's the goal a little bit, is just to kind of create engagement and what have you. So, but I thought it was funny that that's the way it went after that tweet. If you're Georgia, obviously you want the next couple games to go a little bit differently. Could also just be that Florida Gulf Coast is a good team. We'll have to see. All right, let's pull up our third and final one here. Get to Kansas State and LSU. All right. Like I said, I think this is good for LSU because they just hadn't played until Dallas Baptist in the midweek. They really just hadn't played anyone who was going to push them in this way. But I think it's particularly valuable, not just that it was a close game, not just that it went to extra innings, but kind of the way it played out where, they're up 2-0 and kind of cruising. And then Kansas State, gets 2 runs in the 6th to get back in the game. LSU answers. And from a Tiger standpoint, you love to see that. But then Kansas State ties it back up pretty much immediately. And then they come up with 3 runs in the 10th. And so it's not just that they won this game close. It's that, Kansas State clearly decided, hey, we're not going to go away. And LSU held firm and won that game. We talk about A&M and the struggles that they've had. That piece is kind of missing for A&M, it feels like. When the the team that's more talented, and LSU is more talented than Kansas State. When the team that is less talented, competes at a high level and makes it a close game, sometimes the more talented team is a little bit stunned. Like, what is happening? Why is this happening? And then they don't necessarily have that fight back in them. And LSU showed that they do, in addition to obviously having excellent talent. So big win there for the Tigers, just to show, hey, that this is the type of effort we could put together against a good opponent. They have another opportunity today, Saturday, against Nebraska. That should be a fun game out there in Frisco as well. All right, let's go over to the comments. Have a bunch waiting on me here. Trying to catch up here. Phaedra says Alabama versus NDSU was close early. I had not noticed that. Didn't end up being close. But yeah, not, sometimes those Friday games against smaller schools tend to be that way, though, that, those underdogs are always up for those Friday games. Max says Danny D, a dude. I assume that's Danny Dickinson. Yep. Big game for him. Off to a good start. Walker Yaw says Kentucky's pitching may be better than last year. I think there's a chance of that for sure, Walker. I think I'm with you. If Ben Cleaver kind of backs up what he did last weekend, I've liked what I've seen out of Nick McKay as the Friday guy. The bullpen has been really solid. There were times last year where Kentucky, for all the things they really did well, there were times last year, especially once Johnny Hummel wasn't as lights out as he was early in the season, where they were really kind of grasping for answers in the bullpen. And I think there might be a little more depth this year on that, because it's a good combination of veteran guys like Jackson Novy and Evan Byers, and also some new faces out there. So I'm intrigued. Yeah, count me intrigued. John Smith says, any update on Derek Smith's injury at NC State? Well, first off, John, apologies. This is an SEC mostly podcast, but I will say, because I have done a couple of NC State games for SEC Network Extra, there is no update, and that in and of itself is an update. Typically when, I worry a little bit when it's a situation where we just don't have any information on a player's condition. And that's kind of, I'll defer to those who follow that program a lot closer than I do, but I have not heard any update there. Jeremy McCollum says, good morning. Good morning, Jeremy. Always good to see you in here. Ryan says, pumped for the Huskers getting to compete against LSU today. Should be a regional type atmosphere with Riders Park being almost sold out. Fan split will probably be close to 50-50. Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be a fantastic atmosphere. I'll be interested to see how close to 50-50 it is. And there may be some LSU fans out there that kind of are scoffing at that idea. But I've always said that Nebraska might be the fan base when their baseball program is good. Nebraska is probably as close to an SEC fan base for baseball as there is outside of the SEC footprint, right? They really turn up in big numbers, not just their home park, but they travel well. I've heard people joke before that Nebraska would turn up to a chess tournament in Vermont if that's where Nebraska was playing. So I do expect that to be an absolutely fantastic atmosphere. Make sure you're following Aaron Fitt's work. He is there in Frisco covering that for us. Sean Miller, never know what he's going to comment here. What do we got? Joe, can we blame TxDOT for our woes? Did they not pave Highway 30 so the shipment of bats never arrived in College Station or Huntsville? Sorry for the hyper-local joke. Yeah, shout out to Highway 30. For a period of time in my life, I drove up and down Highway 30 every day, and which was mostly fine, except for those who don't know, it is kind of a 2-lane highway, and they have the passing lanes every so often, or at least they did. Maybe things have changed in the last 15 years. Not quite 15 years, 12 years. But one time, but it does create a problem when you have big accidents on that highway, because then there's no way to go around. So there were a couple times where an accident made it to where my commute home, instead of being 50 minutes, was like 2 hours, because there just is not another convenient way to get around. So maybe maybe Sam Houston and A&M both kind of struggling at the plate. So you might be onto something there. Maybe they should get in touch with Academy Sports and Outdoors and get a new shipment of bats. Crosby. Oh, hey man, how are you? Better I assume that's trio there, Crosby. Better trio of freshman hitters than Auburn's Rimbert, Terrell, and Freilich. Yeah, and the funny thing about that is I think Rimbert was the guy that we were all kind of looking at as, hey, if Auburn has an impact freshman bat, Mark Etheridge, when he saw them in the fall, kind of got that impression. It was going to be Rimbert if it was anybody. And honestly, and Bub Terrell was, if anything, it's like, hey, this guy might actually be the best guy here, but it might be a 2026 kind of deal for him. But Terrell and Freilich have been just as good, if not better. I'd have to really think about it to come up with a better trio. I mean, Tennessee has, between Abernathy and Levi Clark and Manny Marin, maybe there's a conversation there, but I think Auburn's trio there has been, from the start of this season, I know we're only 3 weeks in, but from the start of this season has maybe been more impactful from the jump, whereas Tennessee is kind of bringing those guys along a little more slowly, and Tennessee has more depth, position player wise, so that might be part of it too. But your point is well taken regardless. Like, that trio has been excellent. I was really excited about the freshman pitchers, and honestly, maybe I was just overlooking the freshman position players for Auburn. So that's a really exciting group there. Looking forward to getting a look at them at some point this season in person. Justin says, Boomer. Love to hear that. Been playing lesser competitions since Oregon State and Virginia, but offense is looking good so far. Yeah, totally agree. The stars have been the stars, Easton Carmichael chief among them, but also they're getting something from everybody in the lineup. And yeah, they're in a period of time here where they're not playing as stiff of competition. It's going to be a couple weeks until they get into SEC before that ramps up again. But they're doing what a lot of teams look. We're going to talk about teams today, and have talked about teams today that have struggled against teams less, than CSUN, which is who Oklahoma's playing right now, and have struggled. So the fact that Oklahoma just, whenever they have a team that they're better than, they just take care of business so far. That doesn't sound like much. And as a fan, I know that's not that satisfying, because it's just like, well, yeah, we're supposed to roll over these teams. If it were that easy, everybody would do it. and not everybody can do it. So I think that's just as impressive as the wins over Oregon State and Virginia, frankly. The fact that Oklahoma just is taking care of business against teams that should beat. Jaron Green on YouTube. Kahio Aloy hits the ball over 100 miles an hour every time at the plate. Yeah, that's that is true. Kid has elite power. Rocco Pepe also getting it going. This lineup will be dangerous as the season goes on. Totally agree. Like, my colleague Aaron Fitt has been banging this drum. I was a little bit, Mark Etheridge and I were a little more tempered in our expectations for the Arkansas offense. I think we both liked this lineup personnel more than we liked last year and the year before. But we're just kind of cautious about it because we had been wrong before about Arkansas lineups the last couple of years. But Aaron was like, no, I think we can have some faith in this group. And look, it's one game against Charlotte, but like, that's the type of performance you needed to see from the lineup where everybody was on base, everybody was hitting, and you were getting a lot from everywhere. Kuhio Aloy's, somebody that Mark or I or somebody else should probably do a story on this season, because he was kind of the less famous Aloy brother, because, Vahiba was at Arkansas last season while Kuhio was at BYU, but he's an interesting story where I believe I heard the story that at BYU, he was thought of as a two-way guy, and he was gonna be more of a pitcher. But then, kind of last minute, BYU was like, "Hey, we actually might need you to hit more than we thought." And so he hit last season and put up some decent numbers, but it was like he hadn't prepped to be a hitter really in the way that you would have to be ready, because BYU's a Big 12 program now, so they're facing good pitching. But he wasn't really ready for that, but he got thrust into it. So now it's like, hey, with a whole off season of I'm a hitter, getting ready for that, he's obviously showing that his skill is through the roof. Sean Miller says, Arkansas needs 7. I take back my Arkansas needs 7 more Aloys crack. My Aggies need any Aloy right now. Yeah, the Aggies could use an Aloy brother. Maybe there's one floating around out there you can pick up. Tommy Harvey on YouTube. Tennessee looks nearly unbeatable on Fridays with Doyle, Franklin, and Snead. Yeah, man, that's tough. That's going to be, that is stuff on stuff on stuff. I would agree with you. Like, I don't think there's anything to add. I think you're 100% right there. Inside LSU Baseball with Jason Armstrong. If you had to pick the national champion today, who you got, Joe? Oh, boy. Putting me on the spot there. Man, that's a tough one. Put your own answers in the comments. Honestly, if like this is just a snap judgment, but like honestly, if Arkansas hits like that, and Gackel's deal is just like, hey, a one-off, like their pitching is such that that's a tough combination to beat. But honestly, you can make an argument for A&M just because of the talent still. You can make an argument for LSU just because I think their pitching depth has really shown up early on that we thought they could have, but you just never know. That's a tough one, Jason, because I think I've been so steadfast in, A&M, but through the first 3 weeks, A&M's kind of sleepwalking. It just hasn't looked right for A&M. And yeah, okay, you got some injuries, but like it's beyond that. John Smith says, Joe, how did you get your start with D1 baseball? What's your story? And then Sean Miller follows up. It says, I like that question. Maybe Joe and Mark can do an off-season pod on their baseball origin stories. That is a good idea because I think, Mark has a good story too. I'll let him tell that. But, I worked for Baseball America before D1 baseball. So that's kind of how I got my, I knew Kendall and Aaron from working at Baseball America and being in press boxes with them and seeing them around. And then Baseball America brought me on ahead of the 2019 season. But before that, I was just like blogging, working for independent sites, but I can get into it more in depth if Mark and I do an episode there. But I was working in tech, working a desk job, just writing about college baseball more or less as a hobby. And did that for 3 or 4 years, making no money doing it, just doing it for fun because I loved college baseball. And Baseball America noticed me and hired me. And so, even though I'm where I want to be with D1 baseball, and this is where I always wanted to be with D1 baseball. I have a lot of, I owe a lot. I owe a lot of debt of gratitude to Baseball America for giving me my start for sure. And I had a lot of fun there as well. All right. William Cantrell, the freshman class for Tennessee looks as advertised so far, but who will be the catalyst for Tennessee pitching or hitting as the season goes on? If you're just asking about units, we brought up a good point just a second ago about, on Fridays, if they throw out Doyle, Franklin, and Snead on Fridays, or even if they hold Snead back to do a piggyback with Marcus Phillips, then you're getting AJ Russell back, as Tommy Harvey mentions in our comments here on YouTube. You get AJ Russell back, whatever that role ends up being. I think it might be the pitching. I thought it was going to be offense, at least maybe initially. But pitching from the jump has really been what has kickstarted this team. And so if you made me pick, I think that's where I'm going is pitching for Tennessee. In Frank Anderson, we trust, man. Like I did a radio hit in Baton Rouge last week, and they asked me about what do you think of Tennessee so far? And I was just like, the idea that, Liam Doyle did a lot of good things at Ole Miss, but he gets to Tennessee and he looks like a vastly improved version of himself. And a lot of that, I think, Frank Anderson has just proven himself time and again. You give him moldable clay with pitchers and he'll turn them into superstars. And I think we have so much evidence that that's the case. Christian Holt with a Woo Pig Suey. Hello, Christian. All right, let's speed through. We had a lot of great questions and you can still send them in. Can't promise we'll get to everything, but we'll speed through player of the game and pitcher of the game because I do want to prioritize y'all's questions over me just sitting here gabbing at you. So I'm always willing to cut short my segments so that you guys can get your questions in your comments. I'll just go to the chase. Player of the day for me is Daniel Jackson, Georgia, in that win over Florida Gulf Coast. 4 for 5 with 2 home runs, 3 runs batted in. I think it's just indicative of Georgia's. The mound depth is kind of what we have fixated on, and I get it, myself included. But Georgia also has, yes, they don't have like a Condon or Collins centerpiece in this lineup, but they do have a lineup such that like all 9 spots in the lineup can do damage. And I think Daniel Jackson's a great example of that. The catcher transfer from Wofford. Other candidates included Nolan Stevens, Mississippi State, 3 for 4 with a home run, 3 RBIs. Run rule win for over Rice there. Pico Khan, whose name I've been mispronouncing, Pico Cone. My apologies. Was really good. Big swing for Rice. They hit a 2-run home run off Con at some point that makes his line look not as good as he was, but he was really good. He did issue a walk, however. First walk of the season issued for Pico in that game. Daniel Dickinson, we mentioned. Chase Fralick, we mentioned. Big win over Ohio State for Auburn there. Kuhio Aloy, you mentioned. He was 2 for 4, double, 3 runs batted in. Cole Hage for Kentucky in a win over Hofstra. 7-5 win, but it wasn't that close. Hofstra scored some runs late. It was a 7-2 game going to the ninth. Ends up 7-5, but Hage was 3 for 4 with 2 doubles. Also a steal of home. Hofstra fell for the old fall down on the way to second base, first and third play. Tyler Bell's at first, takes a couple steps, falls down. I believe Grant Smith pulled this off for Kentucky last season, and then Hage ends up stealing home on the play. He's off to a really good start for the Wildcats. The Wildcats themselves off to a really good start. I can't wait for Kentucky to be into SEC play so we can get perhaps a better gauge on it. But this Kentucky team looks really solid. I don't think the high highs of the last 2 years are necessarily on the table for this Kentucky team. But the idea that Kentucky's going to go back to just being like a team in the SEC that kind of sits in the bottom third just automatically, I don't think is the case anymore. I think they're just doing a really good job there. And this team, I think it's not the most talented team. It's not the sexiest outfit in the SEC, but I think they're going to be tough. Gavin Keelan, 3 for 5 day in the win over Oklahoma State. Easton Carmichael, I mentioned him in the win over CSUN. Ryan Mormon for Ole Miss. Cade Snell, 4 hits for Alabama in that win against North Dakota State. Bobby Bozer, 3 hits in the win over Miami. But the player of the day was Daniel Jackson. Pitcher of the day, I'm going to go with Sam Dutton for Auburn against Ohio State. Because the Ohio State offense is the part that you have to like, that's the part of their game that can beat you with Ohio State. I saw it firsthand last weekend in Jacksonville. Ohio State can score. They've got some pop. They can run. They're good athletes. Ohio State's struggle is pitching. So I think you're always going to score, and Auburn did that. But keeping it from being an ugly, 9-7 game is the hard part with Ohio State. And Dutton did that. 6 shutout innings, just 2 hits allowed, no walks, 9 strikeouts in that win. Other candidates include Cade Anderson. He struck out 10 and 5 1/3 innings. His first 5 innings in particular were really good before K-State got back in that game. Liam Doyle struck out 9 and 4 1/3. Not the most efficient outing, but really dominant there. Kyson Witherspoon, on this list for the 3rd straight week, 6 shutout innings against CSUN with 7 strikeouts. Hunter Elliott, 5 shutout innings in their win over Wright State. Liam Peterson for Florida over Miami, 2 runs allowed in 6 innings. Brandon Stone in relief for South Carolina. Clemson, we haven't talked about it yet, but Clemson wins that rivalry game. Like I said, South Carolina was right in it, even though, Clemson was sending an All-American pitcher to the mound, and, their offense looks a lot better than South Carolina's. South Carolina was in it. It was a 4-3 game, and it finished 5-3. Brandon Stone really kept the Gamecocks in that game. 4 2/3 innings, 1 run allowed, with 6 strikeouts. He did his best to keep his team in the game. South Carolina just ultimately couldn't quite get the big hit late. Had a couple balls die on the warning track, there's no warning track at Doug Kingsmore Stadium, but what would have been the warning track, had a couple fly balls die right there in the 9th inning that could have changed the game. We'll see how the rest of the weekend goes there. J.D. Thompson of Vanderbilt in a win over UCLA. Good win for Vanderbilt against, I think, an improved UCLA team. 5 innings pitched for J.D. Thompson, 2 runs allowed, 8 strikeouts. Ryan Prager in the loss to Arizona, certainly not his fault there. 6 1/3 innings, 1 run allowed. It was on a solo home run. He struck out 10. And here's what I'll say about A&M, because several have asked, and I kept like pushing it off and haven't really said my piece about that. Obviously they're really talented. And I think this little skid, if you want to call it that, they've lost 3 straight games now. This little skid, I don't think is indicative. Like, I don't think this is indicative of like A&M's just going to crater as a team. I don't think that's it. But I do think this needs to be a wake-up call, because it does just feel like there were mistakes yesterday. There was the base running mistake for Terrence Keel to try to take that extra base where he gets thrown out at third in the 10th inning. There was, in the rally that Arizona scored the 2 runs in the 9th, there were, Terrence Keel's that didn't go to extra innings. So in the 9th, Terrence Keel's base running mistake. But in the top of the 9th, when Arizona scored their go-ahead runs, there was sloppy defense. The offense hasn't come alive. I mean, we know that hitting can be streaky, and hitting can be contagious, both good and bad. When things are going well, everybody hits, and when things are going poorly, it seems like everybody presses. But also, it just hasn't, there hasn't been that spark offensively. I'm not in the dugout. I'm not in the clubhouse. I'm not an A&M beat reporter. So I don't have my finger necessarily on the pulse of like what's missing, but something feels like it's missing right now. We'll see. Again, I'm still bullish on this team. Like they lost 3 games in a row, but that, like it's a long season. Their talent's going to carry them a long way, but it just hasn't felt quite right yet. And then Jared Spencer for Texas is the last name I was going to mention here. 6 innings pitched, 4 hits, 1 run, 2 walks, 9 strikeouts, and a win over Washington. But who boy was that game close? Ended up 10-9. And after, you'll note, I just read off his line. There was 1 run in 6 innings for Jared Spencer, which means the Texas bullpen gave up 8 runs in the final 3 innings. The Texas bullpen has not been a strength. We'll put it that way. In my podcast with Zach Sim from Orange Bloods last week, we talked about Ruger Riojas being the guy that kind of like a little bit of an Evan Aschenbeck for A&M, where it's like, hey, when we're in trouble, whether it's the 3rd inning or the 9th inning, Ruger's going to be our guy. And he, we gave up runs again yesterday. Cody Howard came in as the first guy of the bullpen and gave up 3 runs got 3 runs hung on him without getting an out. So Texas, I think, the rotation has actually been maybe better than anticipated with Spencer and Luke Harrison, in particular. But the bullpen has not kind of held up its end of the bargain. That's going to have to change. The good news for Texas is that it has mostly learned things about itself in victories. And it's always better to learn things about yourself when you win, and winning ugly versus in losses, which is kind of the difference right now between them and A&M, where A&M's having to learn things in losses. Texas has mostly avoided those losses and has learned things along the way. So interesting stuff to monitor. Last run on comments here, because we're past the 30-minute mark already. Good point here by Sean. A&M third base coach waved Keel the entire way. FYI, that wasn't a player mistake. And this team will never be a good fielding team. They traded bats for gloves, and the bats are cold so far. I think that's a good synopsis. Like, it does feel like an offense-minded position player group, so maybe the defense is never going to be a cornerstone. And good call on Keel. Yeah, not a player mistake, but perhaps just a moment you'd probably want back. I mean, Keel's a great runner, so if anybody's going to try to go first or third on that, he's a guy. But it's a good point, Sean. Maybe not a player mistake, but just a missed opportunity. Carl Dunn says, good morning. LSU and KSU had a great game yesterday. They sure did, Carl. We talked about that. If you go back to the start of it, Carl, we dove into that one a little bit. Lincoln Ranger on YouTube, you mentioned good freshmen. UK's Tyler Bell and 2 good arms this week, right-handed pitcher Nate Harris and left-handed pitcher Leighton Harris. Agreed. Yeah, that's Bell's the high-profile guy there, but Nate Harris in the midweek win looked really good. Leighton Harris has had his moments as well. I'm with you. Yeah, I think that's been a really, really solid trio for Kentucky as well as far as freshman goes. The future is bright for Kentucky in that regard as well. Todd Harris, speaking of Harris's, Joe, I just saw a report from Texas Athletics regarding the SEC will have their schools go to only 25 scholarships for baseball and softball with 34-player roster size. #Go Cats. Yeah, I have seen that. I haven't really dove into it because I've been, focused on the game side of it. So I haven't, called around and asked about this or talked about it. So I don't have too many takes here. I just think I'm less worried about scholarships from an SEC standpoint for baseball and softball for that matter, because I think, yes, scholarship value is a factor. But let's be honest in that at least when you're recruiting like the high end, whether it's portal guys, whether it's freshmen, like getting a Tyler Bell to campus or getting Ryan Prager back from the draft, like NIL is ultimately going to be the money over the top. Right. So yes, I do think the scholarship number matters, but less so than in some other conferences that just don't have NIL funds. So I'm trying not to be too caught up on the scholarship numbers, but Todd, it's a good point. Certainly something I need to ask around a little bit more about. Let's see what else we got here. Randy Peterson, War Eagle. Auburn swinging the bats pretty good yesterday, but need to swing it better against Oklahoma State tonight. And Dutton is that dude. Yeah, I would. Yeah, Dutton with a really good outing there against Ohio State. I just froze on it for a second. All right. Anything else here? No, I think we got them all. Okay, good deal. I appreciate all the comments, all the questions. Game to watch today. Texas A&M, Oklahoma State, as was mentioned there. You know that A&M's got to swing it better there. I'm fascinated by just how does A&M respond? Like maybe you lose the game, but at least fight. You know, at least kind of show us something. I suspect, although I would have thought this after losing, to Cal Poly and Texas State, but I suspect A&M will come out pretty motivated here and come out with good energy. But we'll see. Obviously, Oklahoma State's good enough to beat them if they don't. Randy Peterson said, I meant Oregon State. Thank you, Randy. In the moment, I was like, they don't play Oklahoma State. But yeah, so yes, Oregon State's obviously going to be a different deal for Auburn's offense. They'll have to swing it really well. I'm with you there. Yeah, good call. But for A&M, I expect they'll come out with a lot of energy. But again, I would have thought that yesterday, and we didn't necessarily see that. They seemed kind of flat. All right, folks, that is going to do it for this edition of Weekend Waypoints. Went 36 minutes on this because you guys had a lot of great questions and comments. I always appreciate you. You guys are what makes this little weekend project for me a whole lot of fun. Enjoy seeing you all. Enjoy the baseball today, and absolutely, as Sean mentioned in the comments here, an absolutely fantastic day of SEC baseball. I'm actually home today, just working the remote because there's so much to watch that I don't want to have missed out on anything, honestly. So there were games I could have gone and covered, and the weather's nice. That would have been great. But honestly, I just felt like I need to be home and watch as much baseball as I can. So that's where I will be. I hope everyone else enjoys the baseball, whether you're at home or at the ballpark. And I will talk to y'all tomorrow morning.